During the 9 years or so the Sega Genesis was available on the US market, it saw hundreds of game releases. Once Sonic showed up in 1991, the platform saw an explosion in sales and third-party support that allowed it to compete well with its rivals. But before Sonic, the Genesis had been available for nearly 2 years, selling far less units than Sega had anticipated. This divide typically puts fans of the Genesis in one of two camps. You have the folks that owned it before Sonic, and the ones that owned it afterwards. And that's the subject of the video you're about to watch. Since the vast majority of the sales of the Genesis took place after Sonic was released, I have put together a list of games you may have missed that were released before June of 1991. As an early adopter of the Genesis, I got to play many of these through rental chains, friends, and borrowing them from classmates at school. I feel many of them are often overlooked next to the explosive popularity of the games that came later from Capcom, Konami, Acclaim, and of course Sega itself. It's a good mix of stuff I recommend you at least try out on your favorite emulator or flash card. I've got 10 of them for you, so let's get started. Old Rambo 3 here was released in November of 1989 and based on the third film in the First Blood series of movies. It's a top-down run-and-gun that has you controlling the title character as he rescues friends and tries to put down the evil Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Yeah, it's your typical action hero one-man army stuff, but this one plays pretty good. While you have unlimited access to that famous survival knife of yours, your bombs and arrows are limited, so you'll need to use them wisely. Most of this gameplay is built around maze-like levels and killing everything that moves or shoots at you. It's not hard to understand what you need to do, and the challenge is quite solid. It's really short at just 6 stages, and many of the assets get repeated thanks to the tiny 2 megabit cartridge size, but I really enjoyed this back then. I particularly like the boss encounters, where it changes to a third-person shooting gallery with some nifty scrolling effects that give you some serious eye candy. The only thing it really lacks is a 2-player co-op mode, though it does have an alternating 2-player option that can be played with a single pad. I break this out whenever I want some mindless fun and always appreciated the low-key soundtrack as well. The movie was old news by the time this one came out, so many of you may have looked right past it. It's certainly simple, but the old school arcade design still has its charms. In June of 1991, the Genesis got its very first Valis game, Valis 3. It was a port of the PC Engine release that continues the adventure of Yuko and her magic sword. The first 2 games are recapped in the opening cinematics, but would later be released on the Genesis as well. Most of the gameplay here sees inspiration from the likes of Castlevania, with Yuko capable of using both her sword and magic attacks on enemies and bosses. It feels kind of fiddly at first. Your jump seems so short and your attacks super weak, but you soon learn to press up to jump higher and time your attacks with the power bar for the most damage. Power-ups populate the stages kinda like Castlevania's candles and include things like increased magic points, life replenishment, and the different magic attacks you can use. Along with Yuko, there are also other playable characters along for the ride, each with their own powers and capabilities. I was drawn to this initially almost exclusively because of its multi-layered backgrounds. I loved the way it looked and would replay it over and over just to see the parallax. It really is a solid early 16-bit action platformer, and while it has nothing on the Shinobi games, I still enjoyed its colorful cinemas, solid music, and fun story. If you've never played the Valis games before, be sure to try the other Genesis releases, and if you have the means, the PC Engine versions as well. They're all a bit different and very much worth a try. Ever wondered what it would look like if Capcom's 1942 and Ride and Trad series had a baby? Well, Twin Hawk is that reality. As I began to play import games on the Genesis in 1990, I would come across stuff not released in the United States. Twin Hawk here was a Japanese and European exclusive on the Mega Drive, so it was fun to discover it. Originally released in June of 1990, this Toaplan and Sega joint had originally been an arcade release by Taito. It uses a cool Squadron technique that brings in extra firepower when you need it, and your team stays with you until either they or you get shot down. Move around the screen and draw the enemy's fire properly, and they can remain quite some time. There's nothing particularly special about the visuals or music, but nothing here is off-putting about the presentation. It's just a simple and fun shoot 'em up that you may not have played before. It has the typical power-ups, but the stages all run together, so the action never stops. The default difficulty is easy, but it's still hard enough, and the actual hard mode will challenge even the best of you. Like I said, if you loved early shooters like 1942 and Raiden, I think you'll enjoy this one quite a bit. In December of 1990, Wolf Team's Final Zone landed on the Genesis in North America. It was an isometric mech run-and gun that gave you a ton of weapons to use while you hunted down the many enemies that inhabited the playfield. I had a real like-hate relationship with this one. I enjoyed the idea of having a really fast mech loaded to the gill with weaponry, but the viewpoint and the funky animation really got on my nerves. As you take damage, you lose access to some of your weapons, but repair pods are located in the field to help you get some of that life back. It's a fairly simple affair overall. Basically, you are let loose and must destroy a certain number of enemies before you do battle with a much more powerful boss of that area. Your mech is pretty speedy by default, but you have a boost that can really get you around the screen even faster. This also appeared on the Sharp X68000 computer in Japan, where it is largely the same experience. If you can get past the chunky enemy movement and the isometric view, it's actually a fun little game that's really easy to get into. It was never released in Europe, so this might be completely unknown to some of you guys. Battle Squadron was a 1990 release from Electronic Arts. It's a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up that has a rather unique take on the formula you usually see in these types of games. You start out on the surface of a planet collecting power-ups and battling some of the outer defenses. As you make your way across the surface, there are entrances to various subterranean areas that must be defeated. You actually have a measure of control over this and can go into the different stages as you see fit. It comes with your typical power-up system, you know, spread shots, lasers, and of course the ability to shoot behind you and nuke the screen when in trouble. This is one of the few shooters on the Genesis that was Western developed and never had a Japanese release. It was done by the infamous Enterprise Software, makers of the abomination Sword of Sodan, but this outing is actually much better. It's really difficult though. No joke, man. I could not beat this game back in the day. And today, it absolutely tears me a new asshole every time I try. It's definitely for you hardcore fans that enjoy crazy levels of challenge. There was an Amiga version of this that looked a bit better and was slightly less frustrating if you're interested. There is this popular notion that the Genesis did not have any good strategy and role-playing games during its run, that all these types of games appeared on the Super Nintendo. That of course is a hot load of bullshit, and Warrior of Rome, released in May of 1991, is one you should check out if you're a fan of such games. Developed by Micronet, This follows the Roman Empire under the leadership of Julius Caesar. It has real-time battles spanning across both land and sea. You'll get no breaks during this war, and there can be multiple battles raging all over the map at the same time. Sometimes you'll need to defend your area, and sometimes you'll be on the attack. There's loads of options to tinker with, and there are story cinematics that play out as the quest unfolds. It came on an 8 megabit cart that utilized a password system for the different stages you have to play. This was a frustration because these stages can take quite some time to defeat. I do recommend that you play it today with save states if you use emulation or flash carts that have the option. It makes for a much more enjoyable experience. This was not released in PAL territories, and there was a sequel for it the following year that improved it in just about every way. Another import I discovered in 1990 was Heavy Unit Mega Drive Special. It's a port of the Kaneko-developed arcade game released a few years prior. It's a horizontally scrolling shooter that puts you in mind of Transbot for the Master System. Collect a power-up for it and you can morph into a robot with homing missiles, or stay as a ship that has a wider attack range. It's a pretty straightforward entry into a crowded genre on the Mega Drive, but since it was only released in Japan, it might be something you have not heard about or played. The visuals look like something on the PC Engine, with big sprites and really colorful backdrops. It has moments of nice parallax scrolling, and some of the enemies can fill the entire screen. It's crazy challenging too, but it does have a password system to help you out with that. Not the best shooter on the Mega Drive, but one I recommend all the same if you are a fan of the genre. It sticks mostly to the arcade original in terms of design, but does make a few changes here and there to the stage and enemy visuals. It's crazy expensive nowadays, so be sure to try it out first on your favorite emulator. My best friend in 8th grade let me borrow Air Diver, an April 1990 release for the Genesis. He loved the game and considered it vastly superior to the Afterburner 2 port in every way. And as you can tell from what you're seeing here, it looks and plays very similar to the likes of that game, with a touch of G-Lock thrown in. The gameplay is mostly based on you shooting down a set number of enemies before doing battle with a much more powerful foe at the end of the stage. These dogfights are much more strategic than what was seen in Afterburner and G-Lock, so there is a much more satisfying level of accomplishment in your shoot-down goals. You have a choice of missions that you can undertake in any order, each with their own level of difficulty. The graphics are quite plain, however. The ground detail scrolls by so fast you really can't tell what anything is, and the planes are never on screen for more than a few seconds themselves. Most of the real estate is taken up by a huge heads-up display that dominates your viewpoint. It's a good game though. While it's still very arcadey in terms of simplicity, the improved AI over Sega's efforts is much appreciated. Some of these planes are hunting you as much as you are hunting them, and that makes for one heck of a difference. It's another one that was never released in Europe. When I first saw Shadow Blasters, I had to do a double take. Was I playing a 16-bit Genesis game, or was this a Master System release in disguise? Released in late 1990, this rather simple-looking action game is a mix of run-and-gun and platformer elements. You can choose one of 4 players, each with their own powers, but once one is killed in battle, you lose that character for the duration of play. The stages are extremely short and the graphics look more like something from the previous generation. But I don't think Shadow Blasters is all bad. It's true it could have looked better, but I really think it plays fairly well. You have a regular and charged shot that give you different results, and most of the gameplay is just walking left to right and shooting down the bad guys. Each area ends in a boss fight, and you can choose whatever order you want for the stages. Oh, it's simple as hell to be sure, but it has an old school charm about its looks and setup. It's 2 players as well. There was no PAL edition, so there are likely a fair number of you that have never played it. Give it a shot, you might just find something here worth your time. In May of 1991, the Genesis got one of the most frustrating games I have ever played in my life, Wardner. This was originally a Toaplan and Taito released arcade game ported to the Genesis by a company called Dragnet. The story is your basic girl gets kidnapped by bad guy while boy goes to save her. At first it kind of reminds you of an Alex Kidd title, but man is it so much more difficult. I mean, it has the kind of one-hit, trial-and-error deaths that can make it nearly unbearable. It has that old-school arcade feel of games like Carnob, where you must play it countless times to even think about getting anywhere. I used to love this kind of thing when I was a kid, but my old hands got wrecked trying it all these years later. Just making it through 3 of the 6 stages it has took about all the skill and patience I could muster. Death after death after death really hammered my ego. I sometimes feel that one of the reasons that many Genesis releases are not fondly remembered is because they were no fun to the average gamer. The obscene difficulty didn't have any kind of real curve. They started brutal and they stayed that way the entire run. For those of you that love that sort of thing, this can be a very interesting playthrough. Much of it is changed around from the original arcade version, so if you played that, this should offer up a fresh look at the property. It's yet another early Genesis game that was not released in Europe. Sega's 16-bit platform had all kinds of weird and wonderful releases like these. Sega had scooped up a number of publishers that didn't want their games controlled by Nintendo, and it often meant original and arcade properties that didn't show up in many other places. Take a look outside of the region you grew up in, and you are likely to find even more games you have never heard of or played. I hadn't played many of these in a very long while, so it was fun going back and remembering what they offered. When Sonic came along in the summer of 1991, Sega's platform exploded in units sold in North America, leading to an avalanche of support from even long-term Nintendo publishers. The games in this episode were quickly left behind for newer, more well-known endeavors, as well as Sega's own original lineup of top hits. I still like to spread around my time on titles like these, however. They often have an appeal that was unique and not readily available elsewhere. Not to mention a number of them weren't released outside of Japan or North America. If you love the Genesis, I think you will find many worth at least a trial run or two, and hopefully you'll find a couple worth adding to your collection. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.